Greetings goers of YouTube, just call me Dr. Storm. So while everyone else is busy discussing a recent award show, mourning the death of an absolute legend in entertainment as a whole, and arguing over a certain company in the video game industry with a name so ridiculous I just giggle every time I hear it, honestly, I just want to talk about Kung Fu Panda 4, because apparently DreamWorks themselves forgot to leading up to the film, as I've seen almost no marketing for it. The Kung Fu Panda movies are often regarded as one of DreamWorks' best IPs, and even among some of the best in animated films as a whole. Despite the silly name and posters, these movies are surprisingly filled with many deep, insightful life lessons that a lot of people resonate with. The films are about a panda named Po, voiced by Jack Black, who starts out as a big, clumsy oaf that dreams about being a great kung fu warrior, but over the course of 3 movies, well, okay, he's still a big clumsy oaf, but he also ascends to being one of the strongest kung fu fighters around, the Dragon Warrior, who saved China on multiple occasions and earned the respect of everyone around him, when there was very little of it initially. Po is a very endearing character whose journey reflects the film series' overall theme of becoming your best self. And Jack Black is able to master both the comedy and the more serious moments as the character. Po isn't just Jack Black's best voice acting performance, he's one of Jack Black's best performances, period. For real though, while Po's voice isn't really all that different from Jack Black's, I never hear Jack Black when I hear Po speak. I only hear Po because of how alive of a character he feels like. And you can definitely tell that Jack Black greatly values Po as a character as well. Some of the other characters in the movies include Shifu, a red panda voiced by Dustin Hoffman, who is begrudging and reluctant to teach Po at first, but forms a strong master and pupil relationship with him by the end of the first film. Kung Fu masters known as the Furious Five, including Tigress, voiced by Angelina Jolie, who detests Po at first, but forms sort of a sibling-like relationship with him by the second film. Master Oogway, a tortoise, voiced by Randall Duke Kim, who is the founder of Kung Fu, Shifu's master, and who also chose Po as the Dragon Warrior despite Shifu and the Five's chagrin. Mr. Ping, a goose voiced by James Hong, who is both a noodle chef and Po's adoptive father who cares greatly about him. And Li Shang, Po's biological father, voiced by Bryan Cranston, who lost him in a great tragedy when he was a cub, and who finally reunites with him in the 3rd movie. On top of that, the animation and action sequences are top-notch. So much so that even sequences from the first movie released in 2008 are still hailed as some of the best action sequences in animation to this day. The Kung Fu Panda movies are quite a package overall, and if you haven't seen them yet, I highly recommend you do so. Seriously, you're doing yourself a great disservice by not seeing these movies. But, unfortunately, we aren't here to talk about the original trilogy today, something I never thought that I would have to say about Kung Fu Panda. We're here to talk about the 4th installment that just released this month. So, while DreamWorks did have a surprising smash success of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish back in 2022 and 2023, the other things I've noticed them put out since then have not been as great. Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken was one of the biggest box office bombs in recent years, and when we were promised a sequel to one of the studio's most beloved films, Megamind, we got these shout out onto Peacock. There were unfortunately also things coming up about Kung Fu Panda 4 specifically that were having people more worried about the film than enthused. The budget for Kung Fu Panda 4 was only slightly above half that of the previous movies despite their success. People were noting that some of the new characters were not really adhering to Kung Fu Panda's signature art style. The Furious Five, who had been in every Kung Fu Panda movie prior, were nowhere to be seen in any of the marketing, and one of the new characters is voiced by Awkwafina, an actress and rapper who is appearing in so many voice roles lately to the point where people are starting to get sick of seeing her pop up just about anywhere. No, I am not cutting to her rapping as the bird in the Little Mermaid remake as a joke because I refuse to subject my loyal viewers to such torture. While DreamWorks has mentioned in the past that they always planned on making 6 Kung Fu Panda movies, most fans before now acknowledge the 3rd movie as a satisfying conclusion to Po's journey. So, seeing a new movie come out, especially with everything I've mentioned, it just seems like they're not leaving well enough alone and also potentially risking putting a blemish on this franchise by doing so. Well, I have actually seen Kung Fu Panda 4, and I can confirm... Yeah, Mr. B saying Skadoosh once as a joke character who only appears for like 20 seconds is far from one of this movie's greatest issues. So, the premise of Kung Fu Panda 4 is that Shifu tells Po that he needs to pick a new Dragon Warrior so that he can ascend to the role of spiritual leader of the Valley of Peace. Basically, what Master Oogway was in the first movie. This seems incredibly arbitrary because the Kung Fu Panda movies don't seem to take place across that great a deal of time. Po is still pretty young and, well, he's still in his prime at the start of the movie where he single-handedly eventually takes down a giant ray threatening a seaside village. In the first movie, Oogway decided to pick the Dragon Warrior because he had a vision that Tai Lung, the villain from the first movie, would break out of prison and wreak havoc. But here, there's no looming threat as far as anyone in the Valley of Peace is aware. Shifu just says that they need to start Dragon Warrior tryouts so that Po can become the next Oogway. Wait, so does that imply that Shifu for some reason didn't take Oogway's place after he died in the first movie? So what the hell is his position then if he stepped down as teacher of the Furious Five in Kung Fu Panda 3? Speaking of which, yeah, the Furious Five are not in this movie like the marketing suggested. Po takes some time out of the film to explain that each of the five are off on their own comedic, wacky adventures. Thus the five don't have to be present for the events of the movie and can just show up during the end credit sequence where they don't talk, and thus their expensive celebrity voice talent does not need to be hired. Which, okay, technically does mean they're in the movie, but only as a non-speaking cameo after everything is said and done. I'm not going to act like the five were deep, complex characters individually. I mean, Tigress is clearly the favorite child out of all of them. But it's still fun to see them interact with Po and with each other, and their wide diversity of body types allows for a lot of different jokes and choreography in action scenes. Even if some people want to say that they're just extras, the fact that the five not being in the film is one of the very first things everyone always brings up when talking about the cons of this movie shows that many people in fact do like these characters. And the fact it took the word of the marketing team to get them to include the five as a last-minute cameo and not the word of the various animators who actually sculpted the movie really does just speak volumes about how the film industry works nowadays. When candidates do come forward to be the next Dragon Warrior, Po refuses all of them and just chooses himself as the next Dragon Warrior, as he greatly prefers being a fighter over being a wise spiritual leader, much to Master Shifu's dismay. Later, as he meditates underneath the peach tree from the first movie, a thief breaks into the Jade Palace to steal the staff Po got from Oogway in the spirit world at the end of 3. The thief being Awkwafina's character Zhen, a morally gray fox whose ideals clash with Po's virtuous and selfless characteristics. Po manages to best Zhen in combat in an admittedly fun sequence where the characters use the memorabilia in the Jade Palace against one another, and has her locked up. But just as Zhen is being shipped to her jail cell, some goats come in and tell Po that Tai Lung has returned, with Zhen hinting she might know something as she gets carried off. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that the movie actually begins with Tai Lung terrorizing a random mine with ghosts working in it, as the scene pretty much only exists to give the trailer cool footage and so they can use Tai Lung in the marketing. Po visits Zhen in jail, and she tells him who is seemingly Tai Lung is actually a shape-shifting sorceress known as the Chameleon. Zhen is seemingly the only one who has helpful enough information to find the Chameleon, so Po agrees to shorten her sentence if she comes with him to help him find the sorceress. Essentially using this as an excuse to go on another Dragon Warrior adventure, again, much to Master Shifu's dismay. We then cut to Juniper City, where the Chameleon resides, and see some criminal bigwigs complaining about how the Chameleon shakes them down all the time in some rather clunky expository dialogue where the characters state things the others should already know. Getting Has-Been Hotel flashbacks with this one. One of these criminals then reveals themselves to be the Chameleon in disguise, voiced by Viola Davis. Despite how small the Chameleon is, everyone present is clearly very afraid of her, and her demeanor makes it clear she's aware of that. She eventually transforms into an elephant and pushes one of the guys down the stairs, only to change back and leave the meeting immediately after. So, I suppose it's time to talk about the villains of the Kung Fu Panda movies. Kung Fu Panda, despite being known for being funny movies, has some very intimidating and respected villain characters. The villain of Kung Fu Panda 1, the aforementioned Tai Lung, a snow leopard voiced by Ian McShane, was the adopted son and pupil of Shifu, who became evil after Oogway denied making him the Dragon Warrior, which consequently helped harden Shifu as a teacher, and that he felt responsible for training Tai Lung and helping make him into the monster he became. The movie builds up Tai Lung's threat level by showing him break out of a heavily guarded prison built specifically for him single-handedly, and later on defeating the Furious Five all by himself. The villain of Kung Fu Panda 2, Lord Shen, a peacock voiced by Gary Oldman, was a son of royalty but was banished by his parents after he tried to use fireworks as a weapon, and committed genocide against the pandas as he overheard a soothsayer say that a panda would defeat him if he were to go down the path his parents were concerned about him going down. In the events of Kung Fu Panda 2, Shen is a competent fighter on his own, but has also developed weapons that even the strongest Kung Fu masters say can bring about the end of Kung Fu itself, with some of them even refusing to stand up to him at all initially after witnessing them firsthand. And as you may have guessed from my initial description of Shen, yes, he is the one responsible for separating Po from his parents and even for the death of his mother, which gives Shen a personal connection to Po and makes him more of a mental opponent as opposed to Tai Lung being a physical one. Kung Fu Panda 3's villain, General Kai, a bull voiced by J.K. Simmons, was an old friend and battle partner of Oogway's who tried to harness the power of Chi for his own selfish gain after he saw a village of pandas use it to heal his friend and train him in it when he was near death. Oogway Oogway sealed Kai in the spirit realm and wiped almost every record of his existence as a result. In the events of Kung Fu Panda 3, we see Kai best Oogway and absorb his chi in the spirit realm, allowing him to come back to the real world where he tries to destroy everything Oogway built up as revenge, by effortlessly and successfully absorbing the chi of almost every other Kung Fu master still alive, which basically amounts to turning them into a little pendant and gaining the ability to send out a jade copy of them to do his bidding and replicate the fighter's, well, fighting style. So yeah, he's basically a summoner with some cool-ass Kratos blades, even using them to desecrate and hurl a statue of Oogway down the stairs once he gets to the Jade Palace. The common consensus is that Lord Shen is the best villain of the films, followed by Tai Lung, then Kai, who isn't even really a bad or hated villain, he just has to compete with Tai Lung and Shen. So with all that being said, the Chameleon manages to be a much weaker villain than even General Kai, thus making her the worst villain in the series. I'm not kidding when I say that turning into an elephant just to push some guy down the stairs is the most threatening thing the Chameleon does before her final confrontation with Po. She basically has nothing else on her own that can solidify her as a legitimate danger who can easily overcome great obstacles and opponents. Hell, the Chameleon by herself sucks so much that the pitch of her from the marketing is that she can essentially bring back all of Po's previous villains by taking their forms and using their powers and abilities against him. And when you really think about that, the Chameleon's power is just a weaker version of Kai's. I don't know about you, but having the ability to both suppress and summon multiple Kung Fu masters at once at your command seems to just be a direct upgrade to taking the form of one Kung Fu master at a time while not innately having their techniques and abilities. You have to directly get the Kung Fu from the Kung Fu master in the flesh, though in fairness, I guess Kai also has to directly get the chi from the Kung Fu master too. Her powers also don't even really seem to suit the position she's in either. You expect a shapeshifter to be more of an opponent of deceit and be in a position of a trickster or a spy, yet she rules over all of Juniper City as a monarch in plain sight. I don't find it impossible for her to come to rule like this with her skill set, but it feels cheap to not see how she came to rule, and I don't buy that if enough people are annoyed with her, that they couldn't just curb stomp the shit out of her when she's only one small lizard who doesn't know Kung Fu, even if she is a shapeshifter and has guards. Hell, she basically goes down in 2 hits without her transformations in the finale. Oh, but I'm not done roasting this bitch. Absolutely not. You know how all the other villains have flashbacks or animated sequences which explains their backstories? Well, Chameleon doesn't get any of that shit. Instead, she just says that her motivation for turning to sorcery and wanting to take the Kung Fu of all these other villains is because so many people turned her away for being too small and lowly when she tried to learn Kung Fu. Say, who was that one character who said that one thing in the first movie?
Who am I to judge a warrior based on his size? I mean, look at me. I'm over here.
Yeah, if a serpent without any limbs at all and a literal insect that a real-life chameleon could literally eat for breakfast can both become Kung Fu masters, I find it incredibly difficult to believe that every single place turned the chameleon down when she tried to sign up for Kung Fu classes. Okay, now I'm done roasting this bitch, on with the video. Po and Zhen reach a tavern by the cliffside and stop to rest, as well as arrange for a boat ride to Juniper City, captained by a fish who resides in a pelican's mouth. A bit strange, even for a Kung Fu Panda movie. As they're about ready to leave, Zhen gets busted for cheating against the tavern owner at Mahjong, and a bar fight ensues between Po and Zhen and the rest of the tavern. The action is still pretty enjoyable and similar to the other fights in the Kung Fu Panda movies, albeit on a smaller scale. And there are some funny moments and jokes here and there, such as moments where Po keeps trying to return things Zhen is stealing as he's fighting. The fight ends with Po and Zhen falling out of the tavern and onto the boat where the captain is ready to take them to Juniper City right away. During the boat ride, we see Po and Zhen talking about wisdom, and the two try reciting proverbs to one another to help Po become more accustomed to be a spiritual leader who passes wisdom on to others. Yeah, so this is another thing that's worse in this movie than it is in all the other Kung Fu Panda movies. The life lessons and more serious moments are just noticeably not as deep as they are in the other 3 films, and as this film goes on, Po doesn't really seem to learn or grow much more as a spiritual leader than he does at the beginning of the movie. I'm currently thinking back to a much better boat ride exchange at night from a different Kung Fu Panda movie. When Po sleeps that night, he has a vision of what the chameleon plans to do, which is open the spirit realm to absorb the Kung Fu of different villains so she can take over the world. And him learning this information in his sleep isn't really significant in the slightest, since the chameleon was just going to tell him this later anyway after she successfully got Po's staff, which she needs to carry out her plan. Guess they just wanted to get the evil plan out of the way as soon as possible. Po and Zhen arrive in Juniper City the next morning, and the guards of the city immediately attempt to arrest Zhen, while no one in Juniper City knows who Po or the Dragon Warrior are. Po even exclaims that he is the Kung Fu Panda, and they still try to arrest him with Zhen. I know a movie title showing up in the actual movie itself isn't uncommon, but it just feels wrong for it to show up in Kung Fu Panda, especially the way in which it does here. A chase sequence then begins where the chameleon's bull guards try to apprehend Po and Zhen. And once again, not as good as a similar scene in The Goat that is Kung Fu Panda 2, but this is still fairly entertaining and has some funny moments, such as when the bulls pursue Po and Zhen into a china shop, and everyone carefully tiptoes throughout so as not to break anything. Also, the music playing during this chase is actually the song Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne, but arranged by Hans Zimmer to match the rest of Kung Fu Panda's soundtrack, which is usually devoid of any pop songs unlike its peers such as Shrek. Honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing this approach done in other animated movies in the future. Take notes, Illumination. Zhen and Po manage to escape into the Den of Thieves, Zhen's old stomping grounds, ran by a pangolin named Han, voiced by Ke Huy Quan. Han is very unhappy to see Zhen for reasons not quite clear at this point in the film, but Po tries to exercise being a spiritual leader by accidentally convincing the Den of Thieves that if they don't hurt him and Zhen now, then they have the opportunity to hurt them more later as opposed to just not hurting them at all. All while this is happening, hallucinations of Shifu praise Po for getting out of this conflict in a non-violent way and in a humorous manner. You see what I mean when I say this film lacks the depth of the previous three? This could have been a genuine moment for Po to grow and be taken seriously for the most part, but because the comedy is more intrusive on this outing, the teachings of this movie kind of fall flat. Even 3 didn't suffer greatly from this, and people cite that as the weakest installment of the original trilogy mainly because it's more comedic than its predecessors. Han, with some convincing, decides to help Zhen and Po access an easier route to the chameleon so long as they're both out of his sight within a certain time frame. Before they try to infiltrate the chameleon's lair, Po gives Zhen a peach pit Shifu had given him earlier in the film as part of a lecture, telling her that if you nurture the peach pit, it can grow into something great. In retrospect, this is a pretty neat idea. Oogway essentially told something similar to this to Shifu in the first movie, Shifu then told it to Po in this movie, and now Po is passing this wisdom on to someone else. The only problem, however, is that I'm just not sold on Po and Zhen having a strong bond like this at this point in the movie. I don't even think Zhen is a bad or awful character, and it's not even that I find Awkwafina annoying, though there are times where I feel her voice doesn't really fit how Zhen looks. I think it's because we haven't really known Zhen for all that long, at least compared to other characters in the franchise, and because the times where we do see Po and Zhen bond through conversation, again, the writing just kind of falls flat as a whole and leaves me hollow. Pairing Po up with a morally gray character is an interesting scenario to explore, but I just don't think they go anywhere close to utilizing it to its full potential, and the typical runtime of Kung Fu Panda movies is certainly a restriction with something like this in particular. Po and Zhen try to sneak around the chameleon's sleeping guards, only for Po to wake them up with a fart. I know Kung Fu Panda isn't above butt humor, but a fart joke just seems sad to see in these movies now. Yeah, the humor in this movie is a lot more hit or miss than the other 3. Another example being those bunny kids that suddenly grow violent and feral despite acting cute initially. I just don't think it's that funny, especially with how many times they do it. Po eventually gets trapped in a cage and gives the staff to Zhen so she can use it to let him out, only for it to be revealed that Zhen was working for the chameleon the entire time and was trying to get Po's staff for her. The chameleon tells Po that Zhen left the Den of Thieves at a young age to work for her and pursue great riches, which also explains Han's resentment towards her earlier in the movie. Po breaks out by slamming the ground beneath the cage and makes it to the exterior of the fortress after fighting some more of the chameleon's guards. There, Zhen seemingly runs up to Po and profusely apologizes, but it's revealed after another Zhen appears and calls out to Po that this was actually the chameleon disguise, and she uses this element of surprise to knock Po off the ledge, much to the real Zhen's dismay. As Po hangs onto a branch and one of the chameleon's minions he threw off the fortress earlier tries to attack him, Ping and Lee suddenly appear and save him from falling. Oh right, I completely forgot to mention that Ping and Lee are both in this movie because... honestly, I just don't even know why they're here. They run Ping's noodle shop together now, and they have a whole subplot where they worry about Po getting defeated by the chameleon. You know, the same guy who saved China 3 different times from all these fuckers. As such, they both depart together to meet up with Po and make sure he's alright, with Lee going through an arc, I guess, where he tries to act more brave. I don't even really hate the scenes with Ping and Lee by themselves. They can be pretty funny, and it's nice to see them on a buddy road trip after their respective character arcs in Kung Fu Panda 3. But I just wish they had more importance in the story outside of being an asshole way to save Po in this specific situation. Mr. Ping in particular is one of my favorite characters in this franchise, and honestly one of the best dads in all of fiction. And James Hong, much like Jack Black, is able to master both the funny and the serious moments with this character. One might say that Mr. Ping is even a big source of much of the heart in Kung Fu Panda, which is why it sucks that Ping somehow contributes significantly less to the main theme of this movie than he did in all 3 previous installments, even when he was basically just at the noodle shop the entire time in Kung Fu Panda 1 and 2. His big contribution to this movie's theme of change is that sometimes change is good, as he changes his menu and has learned that he should accept Po going and doing dangerous kung fu shits. even though this is not change, as Po has done dangerous kung fu shit for 3 movies before this. Lee contributes better to the themes, I guess, when it comes to him trying to act more brave after listening to Ping's advice, but it still feels like it doesn't go anywhere when he basically just acts as a decoy in the 3rd act for other characters to beat up the Chameleon's guards. Seriously, did we just forget that Ping and Lee basically teamed up against Master Shifu pretty successfully in Kung Fu Panda 3? Whatever, there's not really much more to talk about with these two anyway. As this was happening, the Chameleon reminds Zhen that you have to survive by stepping over others and not caring for others' feelings as you do so. And the Chameleon even tells Zhen that once she stops being that way, the Chameleon will have no more use for her and will throw her back out. This could be an interesting dynamic between these two characters if it weren't for 2 things. 1, we barely see them interact throughout the movie outside of these couple of conversations around the 3rd act. And 2, telling your employees that they will wear out their usefulness one day is one of the most guaranteed ways to get them to quit, which Zhen eventually does once the Chameleon starts enacting her plan. Zhen meets up with Po once he's done talking with his dads and tries to stop him from confronting the Chameleon, even resorting to fighting him, which ends in a stalemate, and Zhen chooses to let Po go on, even hugging him before he does so. This could have been a pretty impactful moment, but something just feels rushed that makes it not hold much weight for me personally, whether it be the fight itself or just the overall pacing in the second half of the movie. The Chameleon by this point has summoned and absorbed the kung fu of various villains, including villains from the previous films. Tai Lung is the first one she summons, and the only one who actually gets to put up a fight before his powers get confiscated for some reason. Everyone else just kinda gets spawn camped. And even then, Tai Lung only fights for about 30 seconds before his kung fu gets taken, and he basically spends the rest of his short screen time in this movie locked in a cage. Tai Lung is just weird in this movie, despite his return being a pretty big selling point in the marketing. It just feels like nothing he says is something that Tai Lung would actually say. The first thing he says upon his return is that Po would never be so stupid as to hand Oogway's staff to someone like the Chameleon, and later when Po sneaks into the Chameleon's chamber and interacts with Tai Lung states that he has lost a lot of faith in Po. Hey, DreamWorks, you know who Tai Lung is, right? You know that you kind of have to explain or show why his behavior between movies is going to be this vastly different, don't you? Oh yeah, Shen and Kai are also among the villains who get spawn camped as well. However, neither of them say a single word the entire movie since they only got Ian McShane back and not Gary Oldman or J.K. Simmons. Also, I'm now just realizing that 2 Kung Fu Panda villains have both played Commissioner Gordon before, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Zhen, Li, and Ping go back to the Den of Thieves to get their help, and Zhen is able to convince them with Po's exact method earlier of unintentionally promising more violence in the future. This allows Zhen to sneak into the Chameleon's chamber so that she can meet up with Po to help him. Before that, Po begins fighting the Chameleon as she shapeshifts into different kung fu uses and animals, and this sequence is honestly pretty cool due to the ways in which the Chameleon shapeshifts into these different characters to throw Po off guard. Such as when Po is behind her transformed as Shen, only for Kai's fist to come through the peacock tail feathers before she fully transforms from Shen to Kai. Though Kai fighting without his summons and blades looks kind of fucking cursed, not gonna lie. Once Zhen arrives, the Chameleon then transforms into Po to have a mirror match with him, while Zhen finds another way to help take her down. And am I the only one who finds it inconsistent that the Chameleon needs to absorb the kung fu of others to actually be able to fight, yet is able to keep up with Po as Po without absorbing his kung fu? Keep in mind that Po is a seasoned kung fu master at this point, so either she got buffed all of a sudden or Po just got nerfed if she can keep up with him in a fight. As the battle progresses, Chameleon grows impatient and transforms herself into a grotesque amalgamation of multiple kung fu users, which somehow seems lamer than the mirror match since she just kind of flies through the sky with Po and Zhen both on her, instead of, actually fighting them. Eventually, Po is seemingly trapped, and it's up to Zhen to fight the Chameleon with Po's staff, with the Chameleon fighting without transforming anymore for some reason. Zhen successfully pulls off a powerful move she saw Po do in the fight at the tavern earlier in the film, and the Chameleon is seemingly defeated. Po congratulates her, revealing he could have just gotten untrapped the entire time, but wanted to see if she could handle the Chameleon. And the Chameleon then gets up and tries to sneak up on the two as they're talking, but Po just hits her with the staff, defeating her and returning all the Kung Fu users' Kung Fu to them. The villains approach Po, which consists of Tai Lung, Lord Shen, and Kai, and Tai Lung tells Po he has earned his respect for him back, and he acknowledges him as the Dragon Warrior before bowing to him with everyone else who came from the Spirit Realm. I can believe Tai Lung bowing to Po with a proper redemption arc, which they didn't really really give him in this movie, but there is no way in fuck Lord Shen would ever bow to Poe. Dude is basically Peacock Hitler and tried to slaughter Poe's species into extinction just to avoid getting defeated by him. Also, I just realized that Kai shouldn't even be here. His spirit literally exploded in the spirit realm at the end of 3. Great, so now on top of making a new shit villain, they brought back the other villains just to ruin them too. Awesome, just great. Absolutely. Oh yeah, and Tai Lung takes Chameleon back with him to the spirit realm. Poe, Zhen, Ping, and Li all return back to the Valley of Peace, and when Zhen is ready to return to her cell, Poe tells her that she's going to be his successor as the next Dragon Warrior instead, which also frustrates Shifu and causes him to storm off. Zhen is reluctant at first, but soon agrees. And the end credit sequence this time around has that last-minute Furious 5 cameo happen so they can help Poe train Zhen to become the new Dragon Warrior. Also, Tenacious D doing a cover of Hit Me Baby by Britney Spears is something I didn't think I needed in life, but I'll give this movie credit and say that I'm glad it helped me discover that I did. So those are the events of Kung Fu Panda 4, and I think that there is much to be desired in terms of writing. There were some good moments and jokes here and there, but the humor didn't really land a lot of the time, and there are many moments that can be downright insulting and honestly just pretty bland. Considering the current landscape of Hollywood movies, there was concern about Poe being nerfed and having him be humiliated so that the brand new younger character could look cool and make up for his incompetence, but I think that thankfully wasn't the case here for the most part. In fact, Poe seems considerably more experienced and more of a badass at times here than he was in the other films, since he can competently kick ass on his own a lot of the time, and Jack Black, as always, turns in a great performance as the character with the material he's given. Zhen is an okay character, and I didn't really find Awkwafina that annoying as her, though I don't have many strong thoughts on Zhen either way, whether they be good or bad. As for the other characters, I feel like I went over my thoughts on them pretty extensively throughout the review. The soundtrack was good, the action was pretty good, and the animation was good. Though I'd say I'm in agreement with what other people have said and think that some of the new characters just don't really match the signature style of Kung Fu Panda. And there's something about the colors and the backgrounds used for this movie that just irks me. I'm not sure what it is, but those things just kind of make it look more cheap looking to me. So overall, I'd say this film is just kind of average, which doesn't necessarily mean bad, but something in the middle for a Kung Fu Panda movie is pretty bad when you look at the rest of the installments of the series and how high they raise the bar. Well, DreamWorks, if you're still going to make more Kung Fu Panda movies going forward, please learn from this film and don't pull any punches going forward. Because with what's been coming out about the production of this movie as of late, you have a lot of room for improvement. As always, like or dislike the video depending on what you thought of it, share your thoughts in the comments down below, subscribe if you'd like to see more of my content, and have a good day or night.